Hello, this is Catherine Dubberly, the Answer Lady. I'm a big fan of KISS looms, and I am cooperating with Kelly at KISS to present to you a whole series of looming techniques especially for KISS. We're going to do this on all sorts of KISS looms, so you get to see every basic technique on your own loom. Welcome and enjoy. All right, I'm right-handed, so I'm going to cast off from the right. If the yarn had not ended up here when the pattern was finished, there is very little lost by just knitting over to here so that I can use my right hand. Ditto, if you're left-handed, you could go ahead and knit over to the left so you can crochet off with your left hand. It won't make enough of a difference to most patterns to be in any way ruinous. This is number 4 yarn, worsted. This is the size crochet hook you would normally crochet with, and I will be able to use it to bind off. First, pick up stitch number 1 on the right, make a chain stitch through it. With that stitch still on, pick up the next stitch and chain through it. This does work, but the spacing is a little bit tight for this hook. And you can make life easier on yourself in a couple of ways. The tension that you place on those chain stitches is done manually, and it will affect the look of the bind off, so you need to get used to putting the same amount of yarn in each one. Now, I'll have to stretch the yarn more if I use a smaller hook. This hook has had something of a hard life because I originally bought it thinking I was going to make a special kind of loom tool out of it, so it now has an unusual curve, and it's flattened where I sanded it. Didn't work out for a loom tool. However, it still crochets, and I think I can make it work. It's about half the size of what we'd normally use, but see how easily it pops in. Now, it won't naturally bring up as big a loop itself, so I'm in charge of making the size loop I want. But I do find it easier to crochet off with a smaller tool than I would normally use for that size yarn if crocheting was the project at hand. Now notice that to keep my loop where it belongs, I pick it up and then I do a good bit of twisting as I work. There is a way that I consider far easier still, and that is to do the crochet cast off but to use a latch tool. This is a tool machine knitters use. Here's something that'll show you how it looks better. See, that little latch opens and closes, and it takes some learning to make it work right. But once you do, it will prevent dropping the loop you're working on very nicely. Down through the stitch, pick it up, slide it back, pull a loop through. Note that I don't have to twist and turn as much. It's still the same exact stitch. I just find it a little easier. These are made for every gauge of knitting machine. Knitting machines are normally called bulky gauge if they would knit this sort of yarn as their first choice, mid gauge if they would knit sport weight or double knitting weight, number 3 yarns, and standard gauge if they would knit fingering yarn, number 2 yarn, as their first choice. And even though this is more of a bulky yarn from the standpoint of a machine knitting terminology, I prefer the smaller gauge, the standard gauge tool, the same as I was telling you about using a smaller crochet hook. And you can see how simple this is. Pick up the stitch, push the tool all the way through, grab a loop, pull it through. Put the new stitch behind the latch, poke the tool down through the next stitch, pick it up behind the latch, pull through. So this is my preferred way to do the crochet cast off. If you don't have this tool, they are easy to obtain on eBay from people who sell knitting machine tools, and from places like D Knits, where Michael Becker, it's called Distinctive Knits, the letter D Knits is his website. He sells them. Other purveyors of knitting machine stuff Oops, I split that stitch. You got to watch out for that. Sell these, and they're in the $5 to $8 range. I think they're well worth it. But as you saw, if you don't have one and don't care to have one, a crochet hook works fine. There's no difference in the stitches. Now I would like you to compare. This is a chain stitch cast on using a crocheting method. I said cast on. That was wrong. This is the chain stitched bind off or cast off with the crocheting method. This is a chain stitched bind off using the transfer method. While they are both chain stitches, they are not identical. And because I ended up in mid-row, I'm going to have to do something to finish that. But it also allows you to compare them side by side. Similar, not the same. So you would want normally to stick with one per project. In this case, if you watched my other video, you realize that this is a sweater shoulder, and it will be hidden inside the seam, and I don't think I will die from the discrepancy. To finish this off, I'm going to snip. There are my snips. Pull the end tail through. Then I think what I'll do is knot it around the next stitch over. And from this point I can weave it in. There's a little bonus thing on weaving in. These latch tools are fantastic for it. In and out of the fabric, come up, grab the tail, and there it is, all gone. And now when I just snip off the end, it'll be hidden forever.